Hi, I'm Barry, and I'd like to tell you stories today about me and language learning. I'll start with English, which is my native language. I was born in Los Angeles, and I learned English the way any future native speaker learns their native language. My whole family spoke English, so I grew up listening to it, and after 5 or 6 or 7 years, I was a fluent speaker of English. And then it wasn't a foreign language anymore because I had learned it. That's it. Super simple. Elementary school Spanish. I have a very vague memory of having Spanish lessons, Spanish class of some sort in fifth grade. Fifth grade would be 11 or 12 years old. And all I remember is the teacher was cute. At least I thought she was very attractive, very young, and her name was Mrs. Rice, so we called her Senora Arroz. And I don't remember any Spanish that I learned from that class. Nothing. So that was the end of my first exposure to Spanish. Middle school Spanish. When I was in the eighth grade, we had been living in the East Coast and we moved back to California. And in middle school, eighth grade here is the end of middle school. In middle school, I was in a Spanish class again. I have no idea why. I remember the teacher was a man and kind of eccentric. The only thing I remember learning in that class was Miguelito el ratoncito, which he told us meant Mickey Mouse. And that's all I remember from that class. So I definitely did not learn Spanish from that semester of exposure to the Spanish language. That's the end of middle school language. High school. When I was 15, I I had to sign up for classes to choose what classes I would take in high school. And I remember going to a gymnasium. There were tables set up around the periphery, or the perimeter, I should say, around the perimeter of the gym. And I signed up for whatever normal classes, English, and I don't know what we had for science. I don't remember. Anyway, I came to the foreign language corner. There was two or three people there behind the tables, and they asked me, what language would you like to take in high school? And because I had no idea what language I wanted to study, I said Spanish. And one of the women said, I'm sorry, but the Spanish classes are closed. Which, thinking back on it, I was in Southern California. I went to high school in the San Fernando Valley. And because it's Southern California, even more than 50 years ago, there was a significant Latino population. And probably if students asked their parents for advice, their parents would say, study Spanish because there's lots of people who speak Spanish around the Los Angeles area. So it'll be a useful language for you. Anyway, I said Spanish, and they said, sorry, the Spanish classes are closed. Well, that was surprising because I hadn't thought about other possibilities. And so I said, what else? What other languages can I study? And they said, we have Latin, German, and I think French. And for no reason at all, I chose German. I had no reason to do it. I had no reason not to do it. I was just picking a language because I planned to go to college, and if you want to go to the college or the university, foreign languages were a requirement. So I picked German. High school German. Ausgezeichnet. So I started high school, ninth grade. In the United States, we go 9, 10, 11, 12 for the 4 years of high school. So I was a ninth grader and had never successfully studied any foreign language. The teacher was an American. He had been a missionary, a Mormon missionary in Germany for 2 years, which meant that he was spending his time. He would have had another man helping him, working with him, and they were going door to door as missionaries, talking to German people and trying to persuade them to become Mormons. I have no idea if he had any success in being a missionary, but 2 years of speaking German in Germany taught him German. In looking back, I have no idea how good his German was. I think it was probably pretty good. He was certainly not a native speaker, but I was in no position to judge or evaluate. It was the first real language learning experience I had, so I had nothing to compare it to. What I do know is that I liked German. I remember that we had a textbook, so we were learning vocabulary and grammar at the same time. There may have been tape recordings to listen to. This is long before the internet. I started high school in 1966. So tape recordings, reel-to-reel tape recordings would have been the modern technology of the time. So we might have had tape recordings to listen to sometimes. Other than that, it was our American teacher. But I liked it. I liked learning German. I thought it was like a fun game to do. I had a couple of friends in the class who also liked learning German, and we had our own little group of enthusiastic students. I have no memory other than of 2 friends. I have no memories of the rest of the students in the class. They might have liked German too, or maybe they hated German. I have no idea. But I learned German. And probably the most surprising thing that I learned from German was it helped me to understand English grammar. And that was a surprise. Before high school, whenever teachers had tried to teach me about the grammar of English, I hated everything about it. I hated the classes. I did not like the teachers trying to waste my time learning English grammar because I was perfectly capable of reading and writing and understanding. It was, after all, my native language, and I come from a family of people who love to read. So I was a very literate teenager. I had read probably thousands of books by the time I got into high school. So these attempts to teach me about English grammar were just irritating. They were just irritating. They made me mad. Then when I started learning German, it was completely different because it was not my language. I had no stake in German. I had no prior knowledge of German. And so German grammar was interesting. It was like, oh, okay. These are articles. Oh, German has 3 articles, die, der, und das. English only has the. So that was interesting. There were words in German that were familiar to me. In English, we say sing, sang for the past tense, and sung. In German, it's singen, sang, gesungen. We say man. In German, it's der Mann. So there were many, many cognates from German to English. That was helpful. And also many words that were not cognates at all. They were simply German words. Um, so aside from beginning to understand English grammar because of German grammar, I just liked the language. And I studied it for 4 years in high school. And the last year, there were a few of us who were the most advanced students, and the teacher gave us, basically separated us, and we read Goethe's Faust. That was our senior year project. So my German was okay. I was not a fluent speaker. I'd never been to Germany. I had a couple of pen pals in Germany. For those of you who are young and don't know about pen pals, in the old days, before email, before the internet, if you wanted to communicate with somebody in Europe, like Germany, you had to get a name and an address and then write a letter. People wrote letters to each other, not emails, not text messages, actual letters on paper. And so by communicating between schools, teachers would get the names of students in other countries who were willing to be pen pals. And so I think I had 2 girls in different parts of Germany who were pen pals, and they would write to me. And then a few weeks later, my letter would get back to them. And it was a way to practice our German. And when I went to Germany, I visited one of them. So it was a way to make a contact with somebody in another country. Not at all like what we have now. I graduated from high school in 1966 and went to the University of California at Los Angeles. Initially, I was majoring in German, but after the first year, I decided that I didn't want to spend 4 years studying German literature. It wasn't bad, but it was not what I wanted to do. And then I found out that I had the possibility of changing to linguistics. And when I learned that as a linguistics major, I would be required to take more foreign languages, I said, this is the major for me. Let's do it. So I switched to linguistics. Let's see, the summer of 1971 was my first trip to Europe, and the only language that I spoke was German. So I flew to Germany. Well, I flew to Iceland first, and then Luxembourg. I don't remember. But in any case, I ended up visiting a family friend in Dusseldorf. I went to Cologne, and visited a pen pal. Went down to Munich, visited my other pen pal, and then I was just traveling. It was just me, my guitar, and a backpack. Footloose and fancy free, which is a good expression in English. And I was in Germany by accident in a little town called Flotow. And at the train station in Flotow, I met a French teenager. I think I was 19, he was 18, named Philippe. We were speaking German together because at that time I didn't know any French. And his German was good and my German was good enough. And he told me that he was going to an Internationale Jugendgemeinschaft Dienstlager. In German, that's one word. It means an international summer work camp, basically. And I had no plans. I was what we call bumming around Europe. So I said, maybe I can go. So I went with him to the camp. He was arriving. And I asked the German director of the camp, can you accept another worker? And he said, sure. Nowadays, nowadays, I don't know if it could be so informal, but he said, sure. So it was the project of the camp was to spruce up, to fix up, to repair a big German house. I don't remember what the reason for it, and I didn't care, but I learned vocabulary like paint stripping, Fensterstreichen, and I don't know, Haferflocken, which is sort of toasted oatmeal. It was vocabulary that I had not learned in high school German, definitely not. The camp had people from Spain, France, me from America, Sweden, probably other countries I don't remember. But it was the common language was German, since it was in Germany, and it was a good chance for me to use German every day. I was speaking with people whose German probably wasn't any better than mine, but it was still a chance to learn vocabulary and practice German. And it was fun. We were all young teenagers. Um, so a chance to use my German, which I did. And at the end of the camp, the two Swedish girls invited Philippe and I to come up to Sweden with them for a week, which we did. So that was my introduction to Swedish, which I later studied at the university a little bit. And it was interesting being in Sweden and hearing another language. I could read Swedish a little bit because I had studied German, and it's part of the same overall language family. So there were words in Swedish that were either like English or like German. In terms of speaking Swedish, I learned a little bit. I learned how to say hello and goodbye. Hey, hej då, hur mår du? But the little bit that I learned is long gone. I never learned to speak Swedish well. So after finishing our visit to Sweden, Philippe and I traveled to Paris, which was his home city, and I spent the rest of the summer in Paris. It was then August, in Paris in August, speaking German, even though I was in France, but I didn't know any French. So that was my first experience of visiting other countries, being surrounded by people speaking other languages. Clearly, if I needed any encouragement, it was obvious to me by the age of 19 that it's really very helpful to speak other languages. It makes traveling and making friends and everything much easier. So having learned German in high school, it really paid off for me on my first trip to Europe. French. After my trip to Europe, it was time to begin another language. And again, for reasons I don't know, I just picked. And I picked French. It turned out to be an excellent decision. The French department at UCLA was top notch, super high quality. All the teachers were not just native speakers, but highly trained native speakers. They really knew how to teach a language. In addition, the textbook was completely in French. They taught everything in French, the grammar, the vocabulary, all in French. And after the first 2 minutes of class on the first day, all the instruction was in French. So I learned French in French. There was no translation. There was nothing but French. And they did a great job. It helped. I mean, I don't know about my fellow students. I don't remember anybody from my French class, any other students. And it wasn't that I was antisocial, but I think I was so focused on the teacher and trying to learn French that I just didn't pay attention to the other students. Maybe I'm weird, I don't know, but I really remember the teachers well, especially the one I had the second and third quarters. Um, UCLA has a quarter system, so instead of semesters, they have 3 quarters, 10 weeks each. And the first quarter, my first French class, the teacher was from, I think, either Morocco or Algeria, but his French was totally perfectly Parisian French. The second and third quarters, I had a woman from Switzerland who, again, spoke beautiful French and was a phenomenal teacher. I was in love with her as a teacher. I just said, you can't be better than this. So it was, in one way, a traditional language class. We started learning grammar and how to speak and how to read from the very beginning. I would say not traditional only in that there was no translation. So somehow they were able to explain grammar, probably with examples, I don't remember. But they were able to explain grammar, teach us grammar in French. I do remember the first day we learned to say, Comment allez-vous? How are you? Je vais très bien, merci. Et vous? I'm fine, thank you. And you? Comment vous appelez-vous? What's your name? Je m'appelle Barry. What's your name? My name's Barry. And we learned to count to 10. That was it, day one. And I remember leaving the class and being so excited and so happy I could speak French. Well, if how are you and I'm fine and counting to 10 and my name is speaking French, then yeah, I could speak French. But the whole first year of French was just a wonderful class, a wonderful class. I have only good memories of studying French. And the second year, I also only have good memories of learning the language. The second year we started literature. There were little excerpts in the first year, but in the second year we read Le Petit Prince, The Little Prince, in French. It's a wonderful book. And our teacher, the first quarter of the second year, the teacher was named Mademoiselle Hamel. She had spent 25 years either teaching or perhaps directing the Alliance Française in Paris. And what she didn't know about teaching French to foreigners isn't worth knowing. She was the co-author of our grammar book in first year French. And she knew everything in that book by heart. So if we made a grammar mistake, and with anything, she would say, Monsieur, you need to take a look at page 87, second paragraph, and review that grammar principle. She had the book by heart. She was the co-author. She and the head of the French department wrote the book together. But she literally knew everything on every page. So all the students, I think, were terrified of her. She was very strict, what the French call exigeante, demanding. And I thought, if I kill myself, maybe I'll get a C. In American schools, the best grade is A, and then it goes down A, B, C, D, and then F for failing. And I thought, if I study for hours every day, maybe I'll get a C, because she's such a demanding teacher. I ended up getting an A, and I loved the class, but she wasn't mean. She was just so hardcore, business. This learning French is a business, and I'm going to help you do it. You better do your part. So again, it was, I would say, traditional university level language class. And I learned a lot of French. I mean, by the end of the second year, I think it was that year, I could speak French reasonably well. Okay. At some point during that year, I also took, and I was taking a German class, and I also took Swedish. So I was taking, oh, and maybe I was doing Yoruba too. I lose track. I think I was, because I think at one point I was studying 4 languages at the same time. So let me switch over to Yoruba. It's been a long time, so I don't remember the exact sequence. One of the requirements of being a linguistics major was to study a non-Indo-European language. So a language that's not in the Romance languages, basically a non-European language, not French, not German, not Spanish, not Romanian, not Russian, something really different. And I picked Yoruba, which is one of the major languages of Nigeria in West Africa. So let me tell you that story now. Yoruba, I think that's how you say it. Yoruba. How should I begin? Yoruba, Nigerian language. It's a tone language, so not the same as Chinese, but it has tones. So one syllable can have a different tone, and that changes the meaning. I don't speak Yoruba. I never did. I remember a couple of proverbs, and I think the language is actually Yoruba. Yoruba, I think. I don't remember. Ekaro, that means hello, some sort of greeting. Maybe it's good morning. I remember a couple of proverbs. Adie funfo mora lagba and agbalagba ki she langbalangba. I don't have any Nigerians to check with, and it's been a long time. So this should have been one of the best language classes I ever took. It should have been. It was not. It was as far from the success I had with French as you can get. And I'll explain why. The class was only 2 students. The other student was a French man, a young man, also majoring in linguistics, and me. 2 students. The teacher was working on his master's degree in linguistics, and he had been a Peace Corps volunteer in Nigeria, where he had studied, learned, used Yoruba. I don't know how well he spoke it. And then there was a Nigerian informant who was actually a master's degree student in graduate school at UCLA, working on his degree in economics. So he was there to be the native speaker to help us pronounce Yoruba correctly. That was the theory. In fact, the American teacher was only interested in the grammar of Yoruba. He was probably working on his master's thesis, and all we did day after day is he would write things on the blackboard and tell us about the grammar of Yoruba, how it worked, which, since we didn't speak any Yoruba, meant nothing to us. It would be like somebody, an advanced mathematician, writing formulas on the blackboard, and you only had high school algebra. So everything to do with calculus, the symbols, the concepts, it could have been Greek or some other language. So aside from these few proverbs, which I think we learned when the American teacher was sick and the informant took over, he would have been a good teacher. If we had only had him, we would have learned a lot of Yoruba. But we didn't have him. Most of the time, he just had to sit quietly. And The American just talked and wrote things on the blackboard and talked. I don't think we had any exams. I don't think we did anything. Had I been older, I would have gone to the linguistics department and asked for a different class. Um, I should have done something, but I was young and I didn't. So, one of the mistakes in my life. One of the good things about getting older is you get more assertive and you don't let yourself suffer through a waste of time. So that was it. I didn't learn any Yoruba except for a few proverbs. It made me interested in tone languages, but I've never studied one. So I could say that studying Yoruba, the only thing it did was maybe help me listen more carefully, because if you have a language with tones, it's like music. You have to listen to the melody. But that's it. So Yoruba was the worst language learning experience I ever had. 1 year, total waste of time. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for me. All right. I mentioned earlier that at one point I think I was taking 4 languages at the same time: French, Swedish, German. I don't know why I was still taking German, and Yoruba. Yeah, I was. I do not recommend studying 4 languages at the same time. People have asked me, can you learn 2 different languages at the same time? You can do anything. I mean, probably not 10 languages at the same time, but certainly 2, maybe 3. The problem is time, number one. If you're going to do a good job at one language and you add on a second language and you want to do a good job learning that one, that you're talking possibly about a full-time job, depending on how fast you want to learn. The other thing I learned from that multi-language experience was, if you're going to study 2 languages at the same time, I think, not sure, I think it's easier if the languages are quite different. German and Swedish at the same time was a mistake. It didn't matter. I only took Swedish for 10 weeks, but the spelling between Swedish and German is too close. So, for example, the word can, like I can do that, I can speak French. Can in German is K-A-N-N, and can in Swedish is K-A-N. Jag kan, I can. Ich kann, I can in German. And I would make spelling mistakes in Swedish because of German. I don't know if I made any spelling mistakes in German because of Swedish. I don't remember. But they were confusingly close too often. And I think it would be like saying, I'm going to study Spanish. I'm going to learn Spanish and Portuguese at the same time. I think you would get so confused because they're too close. They're the same language family. If you said, I'm going to start Spanish and I'm also going to learn Russian, I think it would be hard because depending on your native language, you might find both languages challenging or very difficult, but they would not interfere with each other. The sounds are very different. The writing is different. Russian uses Cyrillic alphabet. So I don't think that 2 very different languages like that would be so problematic. I still think it's a lot easier to learn one language. So that's the end of my multi-language experience. Let me look at my notes. Okay, so I graduated in 1970, the summer of 1970, and joined the Peace Corps, Corps de la Paix in French, and I went to Senegal in West Africa. The first part of our Peace Corps training back then was in Quebec, because They wanted to put us in a French-speaking atmosphere. So we were at a school on the banks of the St. Lawrence River, and we practiced French. And those of us whose French was fairly advanced, started learning Wolof. We were there for 6 or 7 weeks. And Wolof instruction, the teachers were from Senegal. They were native speakers. And the teaching was to memorize dialogues. There was no grammar instruction. There was very minimal translation. I don't remember any. There probably may have been. But basically, we were memorizing conversations in Wolof. And when we went to Senegal after 7 weeks in Canada, we went to Senegal. We were housed in a college, a school on the outskirts of Dakar, which is the capital. And we had some teacher training because we were all supposed to go and teach English. And did we all teach English? No, some of us were doing other kinds of works. But I was there as an English language teacher, high school. And as far as Wolof instruction, every morning we would learn a new conversation. It might have taken more than one morning. I don't remember. And it was just listen and repeat and practice for at least 3 hours. It was intense. It was quite intense because by the end of the morning, by lunchtime, they wanted us to have these dialogues, these conversations memorized 100%, memorized so you would never forget them. And then we would eat lunch and then jump on a car rapide, public transportation, and go into downtown Dakar. And then we were supposed to use our dialogues that we learned. And they were brilliant dialogues. They were perfect because whatever we said, the Senegalese people that we were practicing with, conversing with, would always answer us with the lines that we expected. Let me explain that a little bit. Imagine you learn to say something in any language. I don't know, Greek. You go to Greece and you memorize how to say, hello, how are you? What's your name? My name is, I'm from America. So you know a little bit of Greek. And your pronunciation is okay, so people understand you. And if you can say those things well, then people will assume, oh, this guy speaks Greek. And then they will immediately go, blah, 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 and you won't understand a word because you never learned any of that stuff. So that's the danger of learning a little bit of a language and using it. It doesn't get you very far if you only know 2 minutes worth of Greek or whatever the language might be. And for whatever reason, I think it was just brilliance on the part of the people who wrote these dialogues for us in Wolof. They always worked. For example, the car rapide, they were like big pickup trucks with benches in the back and a little canvas over the top. So or it could be more like a regular bus. And you would ask the apprentice, who was the person who worked in the back where the passengers were, you would say, Fiba Dakar Nyatala, which means from here to Dakar, how much? And he would say Fuki Durham or whatever, some amount of money. And you'd hand him the money and then you'd climb in and you'd ride into Dakar. And wherever you wanted to get off, you'd say Filai Watch, which means I'm getting off here. And they would stop and you would climb off. It wasn't a very long conversation, but it worked perfectly. And you could have total confidence that if you said from here to Dakar, how much is it? They would tell you the answer. And if you said, this is where I want to get off, they would stop the vehicle and you could get off. It worked for everything. If you started bargaining with somebody, let's say that you wanted to buy African fabric, a beautiful, beautiful printed fabrics in West Africa. So you could say, Pispi nyatala, which means this fabric, how much is it? And invariably, the person selling the fabric, first they would laugh. Oh, I left out the greetings. First you would greet them, and that took about 5 minutes. And then you'd say, Pispi nyatala, how much is this cloth? And they would quote you a price that was 5, 10, 20 times more than the real price, because maybe you were a tourist, and that's what tourists are for. The whole point of a tourist is so that people, especially poor people, can sell them stuff at inflated prices and take advantage. That's why it's good for tourists to visit countries. Probably not the same anymore, but back then it worked. So we knew what to say when this person asked us, oh, it's $20 a meter for a fabric that was $1 a meter. And we would say, "Defijafe toropoi, waniko tuti," which means that's too high, lower the price a little. Then they knew that they were dealing with someone who was not going to pay an insane price for the fabric. And you would begin to bargain back and forth. And you'd end up paying 2 or 3 times the regular price that a Senegalese person would pay. But that was fair. It was all right. But you got to practice your Wolof. And like I said, it always worked. It always worked. It's the only language I've learned exclusively through dialogues, through conversations, memorizing and then practicing. And it was good for the amount of time we had to spend studying Wolof before we went off to be teachers. It gave us a good foundation. You could figure out, if you were of a mind to, if you were curious, you could, you knew some grammar just from having memorized these conversations. Well, I don't think we ever talked about grammar at all. We just learned how to say things, and you understood the grammar because you knew what you were saying. We had a little bit of past tense. Not, we weren't supposed to become advanced students of Wolof because we were there to teach. At least in my case, my job was to teach English, and in the classroom, I spoke English. It was, however, I was there for 3 years, 1970 to 1973. It was a great place and necessary to use my French, because Senegal was a French colony. At that time, pretty much everybody spoke French. Many people spoke French, as far as I could tell, perfectly. I mean, they were teaching children in French. The teachers were all educated. They'd been to the university. Many of their teachers were French. So French it was a great place for me to really solidify my French. And to this day, more than 50 years later, French is the foreign language that I speak the best. It's the one that I remember the most. I don't use it very often, rarely. Maybe an hour a week, maybe. That would be the most, a little listening here or there. But because I had 3 excellent years at the university and then 3 years in Senegal, it really reinforced my French. My French is in my head. To this day, people say, your grammar is basically perfect. And if my grammar is even really good, it's because I had good teachers and I liked it and I practiced it. I used it a lot. And that's the lesson that I've learned from all my languages that I've ever studied. The more time you spend using it, once you become fluent, the more time you use it as a fluent speaker or a fluent reader, the more deeply I think it gets embedded in your mind. Learning a language, I'm going to tell you a story in the next segment about learning a language quickly. French was the language that I learned over the longest period of time, and it has stuck with me the best of any language that I studied. So, time for a little break, 10 seconds, get a drink, and then I will be back to talk about Spanish or maybe American Sign Language. I think American Sign Language is next. I'll be right back. American Sign Language. After I got back from Senegal, 1973, I met my wife, got married, started a family. I was not doing anything with foreign languages or teaching English at that time. Well, that's not true. I did do some English teaching later. But at one point, I got a job as a special, what we call a special education tutor. And it was to help a deaf child. He was fifth grade. In a wheelchair. He needed to be helped. He had what we call cerebral palsy, which is basically brain damage. So he couldn't speak. He was deaf. He did know sign language, some. It was hard for him. It was hard for him to make signs with his hands because he didn't have good control of his muscles. But in any case, I was his helper. And his class, there was a school, or there was a school for the deaf in Portland, where I lived at the time. And his class of 5 or 6 students and their teacher were being mainstreamed, which means brought in to be part of a regular public school class. And his teacher was there to interpret. So while the regular classroom teacher was teaching, their teacher was signing, translating into American Sign Language. She would be doing signing for them, and then she would help them when they were trying to do their schoolwork. And I was with the student that I was helping. So in order to try to communicate with this boy and with the other students, but particularly him, because he was my job, I started taking sign language classes. And it's called, in English, we call it ASL, American Sign Language. It's essentially talking with your hands, your fingers, your face, your body. It's a very expressive kind of language. For me, having studied linguistics and liking to learn languages, I thought it was super, super interesting. I'll explain a couple of things about it that I thought were so wonderful. I took it for 2 semesters, and the first semester, the teacher was not deaf. He was the child of deaf parents. So he grew up from the time he was a baby, learning to communicate with his parents through sign language. And he must have learned to speak from exposure to normal speaking people. I don't know that much of his story, but his signing was perfect. He was completely fluent in sign language. And he was a very good teacher for us as beginners because he could speak English and explain things. The second semester, the teacher, his name was Sammy, I remember. He was a deaf person. So he taught us, I don't remember if he was able to speak at all. He could certainly read and write. Maybe he wrote things, I don't remember. But he was a very good teacher. And I really liked learning sign language. It had been a while since I had learned any foreign language at that point. And so to start a new language, and also one that was really different from any language I had studied, was, like I said, super interesting to me. I'll just tell you a couple of things about sign language that I found fascinating. One is when you're explaining things in sign language, the area in front of your body is like a stage. So you can show with sign language, there was a house here. So the sign for a house is like two lines going down. So you can place it in space in front of you. And the people watching you will remember, oh, there's a house over here, and then there was a road here, there was a car going down the road, and over here there's a tree. So they're basically, with their sign language, setting a scene for you. Or inside a school, or outside, or at the playground. They create some sort of scene, and you remember it. So you know, oh, the house is over here, the tree is over here, the road is over here, the airport is over here, and the planes are coming down and landing. You remember all this. It's so visual. That was cool and interesting, being able to just say, all right, what do I want to explain? All right, I'm talking about my bedroom, and the bed is over here, and the light is over here. And you put these things into the situation, into space. Everybody remembers it. That was cool. The other thing that was, I thought, so interesting was how you do tenses, verb tenses. Obviously, there's no verbs with words. You can't say, I walked to school yesterday. So you have to do something else to indicate what time, what tense you're speaking in. And in American Sign Language, you use the plane of your body. If you imagine there's, how can I explain it? A plane going vertically down through your body. Anything out in front of your body is in the future. Things that are close to your body, that's right now. And things in the past are behind your body. And if it's way in the past, then you indicate with your hands way, way a long time ago. And you gesture far behind your body to say, if you were talking about dinosaurs, you would say, a long, long time ago, there were big animals that did this, that, or the other. So all the things that we can do in English or French or whatever, using language and sounds, sign language speakers can do with their body and space around their body and the signs that they use for different things. So I did that for a year. I got good enough that I could tell my student little stupid stories that he thought were funny, whether he was laughing because they were really good stories or because he didn't have anything better to do, I don't know. But I had fun making them up. I've always liked telling stories to children, and this was a chance for me to practice my sign language and tell stories in sign language. And then I stopped working with him after a year, and I forgot sign language. The only signs I remember are, see if I can do this on popcorn, pop, 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 popcorn going up, and vampire, two fingers into your neck. That's the sign for a vampire in American Sign Language. Sign language, as far as I know, is different for every language in the world. So if you go to Spain, they have, the deaf people would have their own sign language. If you go to Japan, they have their own sign language. It's just as bad as spoken languages. Confusion and incompatible systems. But it was really cool. And the teachers were good. And you learned by watching and copying. That's how I learned to use sign language. You watch and you copy. No listening, because it's sign language. Hello again, I'm back. In the 1980s, I think, remember this is 45 years ago, but I think it was in the 1980s, I taught for 8 years at a private school, kindergarten through 12th grade, through high school. Let's start that one again. Okay. In the 1980s, I got a job teaching at a private school in Portland, Maine, and I was working with elementary school students. And at some point, maybe around the fourth year, fifth year, the school decided that they wanted to teach the children a little bit of Spanish, but they didn't want to hire a real Spanish teacher. They had one for high school, I think. I'm sure they did. But she was busy teaching high school students, and she was apparently not interested in 1 day a week with little kids. So they were trying to figure out what to do. And I said, if you'll pay me for the training, I will learn Spanish. Which, when I think about it, is kind of funny. But I had my degree in linguistics. I was confident that I could learn a language. And why not? So the school agreed. They paid for me to take an intensive language class, Spanish class at the local university. They paid for some language cassette tapes, which I'll talk about in a minute. And they paid for me to go to a private language school in Mexico for 3 weeks. So at the beginning of summer, I started taking an intensive, it was, I think, 4 hours a day, Spanish class at the local university. You'll remember from the beginning, I had Spanish in elementary school and never really learned it. So this time I was ready to learn Spanish. Unfortunately, once again, I had a crappy teacher. I don't remember her name. She was an American with a PhD, and I'm sure she knew Spanish extremely well. But her idea of teaching us Spanish was a little bit of grammar practice, and then she would tell us stories about her travels in Mexico, her travels in Latin America, Central America, South America, probably Spain, I don't remember. And that would have been okay, except she didn't tell us these stories in Spanish. She told us the stories in English. That would be like me speaking French to you in order to teach you English. What a stupid idea. So she was terrible. And although I learned a little bit of Spanish grammar, mostly I wasn't learning anything because all she did was talk to us in English. So that was another one. That was my second worst language learning experience. Yoruba was the worst because it could have been so good. And the college Spanish, this university class, was the second worst because I spent time and got nothing from it. Fortunately, the school where I worked also paid for a set of FSI cassette tapes. FSI is Foreign Service Institute. I don't know if it still exists, but back in the probably 1950s, 1960s, they developed language training courses in, I don't know, 50, 60, 80 languages, all kinds of languages. It's, common languages like Spanish, obscure languages from Africa, and the tapes were designed for diplomats or anybody who needed to learn, probably mostly diplomats, anybody who needed to learn a foreign language. So my school bought me level 1, level 2 Spanish tapes. And that summer, I walked around for about 4 hours a day just listening to Spanish and eventually trying to repeat. So they would have conversations, they would have grammar practice, they would have substitution drills. I speak Spanish, French, I speak French, German, I speak German. So imagine something like that, except in Spanish. So I learned some Spanish, but I was teaching myself. I didn't have, my university class was useless. Then I went to Mexico, to Morelia, and I lived with a Mexican family, had lunch with them every day, or lunch with the father. He was retired, and he would tell me stories about life in Mexico, and I understood some of it, and I would listen. And then I had a private grammar teacher for 3 hours every morning and a private conversation teacher for 3 hours every afternoon. And when I arrived, my Spanish was pretty rudimentary. They gave me a test, and I don't think anybody was impressed by my level of Spanish. I definitely wasn't impressed by my level of Spanish. At the end of the 3 weeks, I had no contact with any English speakers for 3 weeks. And I was learning songs. I found a young man to teach me Spanish songs, Mexican songs, that I could use with the children. And by the end of the 3rd week, I was having conversations with my teachers that I don't have any recordings, but I think were reasonably fluent. I mean, I know we talked about all kinds of subjects, and I was comfortable speaking Spanish. So I made a lot of progress, mostly because of those 3 weeks in Mexico where I only used Spanish. And then I came back to the United States. So this was a quick, basically I learned Spanish in 3.5 months. It was a fast program. Then I came back and I used my Spanish to teach little kids, which meant mostly we just sang songs. Un elefante se balanceaba sobre la tela de una araña. So they were just little kid songs that little children in Mexico would learn. And that was how I used my Spanish, which really means I wasn't using my Spanish at all, except for these songs. They're not, especially 40 years ago, there were not a lot of Spanish speakers in Maine, where I live. And I was busy. I was teaching. I had my own children and my wife. And so I didn't really have any easy way to practice Spanish, and I didn't have opportunities to use it. Again, this was pre-internet, before the internet. So there was no YouTube, there were no documentaries, there were, the 100 million videos in Spanish, no shows on the internet to watch, nothing. And what happened, of course, is that my Spanish began to disappear. And what I learned from that experience was learning a language very quickly. You might learn it and you might be able to speak it and understand it, but unless you can keep up that practice, especially if you learn it rapidly, you're going to lose it pretty rapidly too. You really need to maintain, you need to practice, you need to use it. My French, even when I don't use it, I can have conversations in French. It's so embedded in my brain now that I can speak French. If I don't use it for a month, that's not good, but I can still remember things. The vocabulary is there, the grammar is there. And with Spanish, no. Es una lástima, but no. It's pretty ragged right now. I could survive in a Spanish-speaking country, but nobody would consider me fluent. So that was an important language learning lesson. If you go to the trouble of learning a language, unless you simply don't need it anymore, you'll remember it better if you use it over a period of time. That at least has been my experience. Um, that's life. Okay, I think I have one more language. Bear with me. All right. The end of the video is coming, finally. And I have a surprise for you. If you wait till the very end, I have a surprise, a secret surprise. Okay. In November of 2023, I decided to do an experiment. I decided to see if I could learn the sounds of Turkish. The sounds of Turkish. Not to learn the Turkish language because I'm too old and I don't have time and I'm not traveling around the world anymore. So it was by way of an experiment. As you've heard, I've spent all these years doing other things too, but also I've learned languages, I've used them. I've lived in Senegal for 3 years. I've been to Europe several times. And I've also been teaching English again since about 2021. Once COVID hit and I started staying home, I started using online apps. The whole world of the internet is, of course, available to us. And there's all these different apps where people can trade languages and practice languages and look for teachers and whatever they want to do. And I thought, what will happen if I try to learn the sounds of a very different language? Turkish is quite different from English. I'm very impressed that Turkish speakers learn English. And if I met any Americans who learned to speak Turkish well, I would be equally impressed. These are very different languages in many ways. So I made this decision, and it was by way of an experiment. I was 73 years old, 74, whatever, a couple of years ago. So November of 2023, I started listening to Turkish, and my goal was to learn the sounds of Turkish and be able to pronounce them well enough so that Turkish speakers, native speakers of Turkish, would say, "Oh, I can understand what you're saying. Your accent is not bad. Your pronunciation is okay." And step one was simply to begin listening to Turkish anywhere from 2 to 4 hours per day. And when I tell people that, when I told them that back then, and when I tell people that now, they said, "But how can you listen? How could you listen if you didn't understand?" And I said, "It's easy to listen if you don't understand. What could be easier? You don't have to worry about vocabulary or anything. You're just listening to the sounds of the language." I would point out that when babies start listening to their native language, their future native language, they don't understand. Little people born in Turkey don't understand Turkish when they're 2 months old or 3 months old or 5 months old. Little Americans don't understand English. None of us understand what becomes our native language in the beginning. We listen and we watch, we pay attention, but who cares if you don't understand? And you can say, well, yeah, for a baby, but they're just babies. And yes, that's true. So I can only speak for myself. It did not, and it does not bother me to listen to a language that I don't understand. What I listen to are the sounds of the language. So I found things in Turkish, and I would listen to them repeatedly For example, I use TED Talks. I found TED Talks in Turkish, 10, 15, 20 minutes long. I would choose which TED Talks to listen to. The subject didn't matter because I didn't understand any of it, and since it didn't matter, I would choose by the voice of the speaker. If it was somebody with a horrible, graspy, irritating voice, I wouldn't listen to it. If it was somebody with a nice voice, male or female, and I just liked the sound of their voice, then I would listen to it. What happens when you listen and listen? I think I talked about this in the other video, but I'll repeat myself. What happens when you listen a lot to a language you don't know, and you listen repeatedly, is the sounds begin to clarify themselves. So you might say, oh, this language has a B sound, it has an N sound, it has some vowel sounds that I'm not sure of. I was helped in learning the sounds of Turkish because I had studied German. And Turkish has some vowel sounds that are definitely not like anything in English, but are, to my ear at least, close to the sounds in German. So that helped me. But mostly I just listened and listened and listened. And after a couple months, I then started trading English for Turkish time with native speakers, and I would read words, I would try to read sentences, and they would correct my pronunciation. So I still remember. Oh, if you hear my dog Ollie, it's because he wants to leave. Hang on, Ollie. The vowel sound in Turkish, which causes a lot of people trouble, I think, is the difference between E and I. And Turkish has both sounds. We don't have the I sound in English. And it's a completely different vowel in Turkish, just like A and Ah are different in English. Oliver dog, are you talking to us? Ollie, speak. Hang on, we'll see if we can get the dog to speak. Ollie, speak. Come on, speak. Ollie, speak. 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 Not sneeze. Speak. Speak. Good boy. Speak. Oh, that was pretty good. Okay, come speak. 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 Oh, good job. That was a bark. Speak. 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 Oh, excellent. There you go. You can have 2 more treats. Okay, I'll let you out in a minute. I'm almost done. See, you can teach dogs to speak English too. You just have to have treats. What was I saying? Yes, I had native speakers to correct my pronunciation. Highly recommended. Ollie's still speaking to us. And by the end, when I got too busy to continue with my Turkish experiment, native speakers told me that my pronunciation was pretty good. I haven't used or practiced Turkish for well over a year now, end of 23, 24, 25. So my Turkish is slipping away, but I was happy with the results. I felt like, okay, spend a couple of months, really work hard on listening, and then get help on the pronunciation from native speakers because they're going to pronounce the best, and learn the sounds of a language. And I have to go and take care of Ollie. I'll do a separate video. So I promised you a surprise, and I will end this video with the surprise. And I'm all done talking about my 55 years of part-time language learning. That's my story. Thank you very much. for your patience. Okay, there you are. There you are. There you are. There we go. More. More. Oh, what a good boy. You're in the picture. Lick my hand. Lick my hand. Oh, good licking. Lick my face. Give me a kiss. Thank you. Oh, you're a good boy. All right. Hold down.